The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said, he is Elijah. And still others claimed, he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, the man I beheaded, has risen from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? The head of John the Baptist, she answered. At once the girl hurried in to the king with a request, I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Sometimes it feels strange to say, praise to you, Lord Christ, after such a gospel reading as this, and it's a terrifying tale. Sometimes it feels strange to be looking at these beautiful flowers on this weekend of weddings. We had a wedding here last night, hence the flowers here, and we also have actually a wedding in the courtyard, which I'll be doing for two of our wonderful parishioners from the Contemporary Family Worship Service. Suzanne and Eric are finally tying the knot, and so I'll actually be slipping out of here after my sermon and presiding at a small private ceremony for them. But how to think about John the Baptist and Herod offing him at this party? You know, sometimes we think that our generation is so corrupt and violent here in 2012, and our world does have problems, but we are not the only generation that has seen its fair share of corruption and violence. The world that Jesus lived in, a world where this Herod birthday party could happen, such a terrifying and macabre scene, ending with a girl being presented, the executioner's, an executed criminal's head on a platter. Jesus' time was as corrupt and violent, if not more, than ours. It was a strange world that he found himself in. A strange world where Herod could have a party and invite all of his officials and all of the well-connected political allies to have a feast, a banquet with way too much food and way too much drink that somehow involves a young girl being drawn into this intrigue, being drawn into this struggle between her mother and Herod the king, and eventually asking for an execution as what she would desire. It's such a strange scene. Need a little bit of historical background to know who this Herod was. This is Herod Antipas, and Herod Antipas was the son of Herod the Great. Herod the Great came along about 40 years before Jesus was born. And what had happened was this. The Romans had conquered Palestine and Galilee and the whole Holy Land area, and they needed a ruler. Well, Herod the Great, who was from a well-connected family, said, I've got some Jewish credentials and some good family history credentials. How about I be your ruler? It'll be good public relations with the people. The Romans said, well, that's okay as long as you do everything that we tell you. And Herod said, well, that works for me. And the Romans said, well, that works for us. And so Herod the Great became this kind of puppet king for that whole area. Herod the Great died right around the time that Jesus was born, and his son, Herod Antipas, then assumed his position, and he was given specific control over Galilee, where Jesus was. And so this is Herod Antipas, who had all of these political connections, and he's drawn them together. He also had the role of keeping the Romans happy and watching out for troublemakers. If there was ever a troublemaker in the Bible, it was John the Baptist. You remember John the Baptist telling people that the axe is at the root of the tree. You remember John the Baptist saying, "You brood of vipers." Well, Herod was always on the lookout for troublemakers, and in this case, he had John the Baptist executed. This historically is chronicled also in all four Gospels, and also by a historian named Josephus, who was a Roman historian. So we know this happened. Josephus doesn't tell us how it happened. Rather, the Gospels give us the full story. And it's kind of hard to keep track of the narrative because you've got, Herodias, who's the wife, and then the daughter who dances. But the point to realize is that, it's a web of intrigue and corruption. And it says at the end that Herod was distressed when she requested that John be put to death. But notice he wasn't distressed out of any sort of moral obligation. He was distressed because his guests had heard him give an oath. And so this being an honor-shame society, he had to fulfill the oath because of the guests. Oh, make no mistake, he wasn't distressed about the life of John the Baptist. He was distressed about saving face in front of all these people. How to interpret this passage? How to interpret this coming right in Mark chapter 6 as we've been going through the life and ministry of Jesus? One of the tricks that I think I've talked about with you all in interpreting a passage like this is to figure out what comes exactly before it and what comes exactly after it. So let's do a little bit of Bible study, will you? If you would open up to page 1024 in your red NIV Bibles, we've got Mark chapter 6. So page 1024, let's take a look at the page and see where this gospel passage falls. This is going to help us out. So if you're looking on page 1024, Mark chapter 6, you can see bottom left-hand corner is the story, John the Baptist beheaded. What is the story directly before it? Okay, Jesus sends out the 12. Good. I was reading through that. That doesn't help us too much, but the passage directly after the John the Baptist story is what? Jesus feeds the 5,000. Good. Now here's what really helped my analysis. Isn't it interesting that Jesus' party is described exactly after Herod's party? So we get this description of Herod's party with his guests and his macabre scene, and then we get a story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, and this is Jesus' party. And how different are these two parties? In Herod's party, it was invite only, and the people that invited were the well-connected and the politically astute. In Jesus' party, there are no invites, but thousands of people show up, and they are the proverbial poor, tired, huddled masses. In Herod's party, it took place in a palace. Jesus' party takes place on a hillside. Herod's party was characterized by excess and debauchery. Jesus' party is characterized by everybody having enough and being filled and satisfied. Herod's party is characterized by overindulgence. Jesus' party is characterized by justice and feeding and fulfillment and everyone having enough. Amazing, these two stories put right next to each other. And it leads us to ask the question, which party are we going to go to? Kind of a metaphor for life, isn't it? Are you going to go to Herod's party? Or are you going to go to Jesus' party? Are we going to go to the party characterized by excess and corruption? Are we going to go to the party characterized by feeding and justice and peace and abundance? I hope that each and every day we make the decision to go to Jesus' party. Sometimes people say that life is very complicated and there's so many gray areas. That can be the case. But at other times in life, it can be so simple. There's the choice of the right thing to do and the choice of the less right thing to do. And sometimes it's that simple. You know, I met an ethicist. She was a professor up in D.C., and she studied ethics. She was an ethicist. Dr. Sandra Wheeler was her name. She was giving a talk, and she said there are two types of ethical dilemmas. There is perplexity, we just don't know what to do, and there is temptation. We know what to do, but we just can't get ourselves to do it. And she said one of the tricks that humans play is trying to convince ourselves that we are in a dilemma of perplexity, I just don't know what to do, when actually we're in a dilemma of temptation. I know what to do, but I just can't get myself to do it. We have this choice before us of the two parties. Which one are we going to attend? Well, I hope we choose Jesus' party. And that would be a way of making a stand. I think that Christians in our world today, we're called to make a stand, not to draw a line in the sand, but to make a stand to say that God has claimed us and that we are responding to God's claim. And as we are part of culture, and we do need to be part of culture, we still might say to that culture that there are certain things we're not going to participate in. There are certain things that we're not going to be a part of. And notice that word participate is kind of like the word party. Might we make a stand in our lives as Christians and say this culture has all sorts of things to offer, but there are some things that I'm just not going to be a part of. I'm not going to participate in that because I have been claimed and invited and am planning to attend a different party. This hymn that we just sang, hymn 686, Come Thou Fount, you might want to take a look at it because there's an interesting change that happened in verse 2. Hymn 686. Let's take a look real quick. And I won't make us juggle any more books. The first verse is lovely. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. You get to the second verse, and it says, Here I find my greatest treasure. That's actually a change. The original line of the second verse was, Here I raise my Ebenezer. Anybody ever heard that? Well, when they did the 1982 hymnal, they changed it because nobody ever knew what an Ebenezer was. And everybody was always coming up to folks afterwards and saying, why are they talking about a Christmas carol in this hymn? Ebenezer Scrooge? What's all this about? So they changed it. But it leads us to beg the question, what is an Ebenezer? It turns out that it comes from the Old Testament book of Samuel, where the Israelites fought a battle against the Philistines, and they were delivered victory by the Lord. And so Samuel, he took this big rock, and he set it up in that place, this big pillar. Think about like Stonehenge, this big monolith right there in the desert. And he said, I'm calling that rock Ebenezer. He named it Ebenezer, and he set it up so that all could see. What if as Christians we're called to raise our Ebenezer? That's what the hymn is saying. Let's raise our Ebenezer. Let's take a stand. Let's say for all to see that God has put a claim on my life and I have responded to that claim. It's not like drawing a line in the sand because you can wash away a line in the sand. But if you raise a rock right in the middle of the desert, that's going to stay there for all to see. Let's raise an Ebenezer to say that I'm going to make a choice every day about whose party to attend. I'm going to make a stand. I'm going to raise an Ebenezer. To make a choice so that I can say in this strange culture, this place where party like Herod's could happen, I'm just not going to be a part of those things because Jesus has way too much in store for me. His party characterized by feeding and abundance and justice rather than those other parties which are characterized by corruption and indulgence. And so I'm reminded of another song from a slightly older book. This one, Songs of Praise. And there's a song about making a decision, a daily decision. And it goes like this. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Let's try that. I have decided
to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. One more time. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus.
no turning back, no turning back. Amen.